everyone, and welcome to the AI App Store's panel for Twin Cities Startup Week. We are incredibly excited to have some amazing panelists here with us today to discuss what I think is a really important and critical topic for all of us right now. It's around engagement of our youth, the future of our hospitals and healthcare, and how we incorporate youth into some of the things that we're doing that will shape all of our future around this topic. We're all aware that currently with the pandemic and the impact we've had financially in our world to our healthcare systems, to a lot of the systems we all rely on, we're seeing a lot of change. And that change is going to require innovative ways of thinking. And we've brought together the folks today to help us talk about some of the ways we can all think and react differently to what we're seeing. I wanted to start us out with a short video just to put into perspective some of what this pandemic has done in terms of perspective for all of us and the different changes we're seeing. And then we'll be hearing from our panelists some questions around this topic.
It's interesting that the things we cherish most are the same things we walk right by. They become so intertwined in the status quo that ultimately it becomes impossible to tell them apart from our day-to-day. That is impossible until things change. Because as it turns out, that thing we call life, it has a say. There's a saying that you never really know what you have until it's gone. Sometimes it takes the most abrasive of reminders, the harshest of times, to help us recapture that perspective, to lift us up and show us what we had previously failed to see. And while our darkest moments test our strength, they push our boundaries, even transform our reality, they can also be the bridge that leads us exactly where we need to be. They remind us sometimes it's not about how we spend our time, but who we spend it with. That quiet brings clarity, and the world can spin so fast that we forget to think about our place within it. It reminds us how humanity is bigger than the sum of its parts, and it takes just as much energy to build up as it does to tear down. It reminds us that no matter where we live, what we speak, or who we pray to, we're not so different after all. It reminds us that there is so much more good in this world than evil, so much more love than hate, and so much promise for tomorrow. Someday we'll look back on this moment with the lessons we've learned, the hardships we've faced, and we will be reminded of the miracle that is the human spirit, unwavering in its resolve, unbreakable at its foundation, stronger than we could ever comprehend. See, sometimes it's hard to look around and find a reason to be optimistic, to understand or comprehend why. But what we'll find is that if we look hard enough, immersed in the uncertainty, the disruption, and in some cases, the tragedy, there's something to be gained. A tiny candle flickering in the night that will eventually grow to light our way. Because that road to tomorrow is paved with hope. There are pages unwritten, stories untold, and a new chapter to begin.
All right, and with that, With our new chapter with the insights of the individuals that we have on our panel today, I'm very excited to introduce these folks to you. We have Bjorn. Bjorn is an 8th grader and interested in entrepreneurship. One of our youth who wants to impact the future and what we see. Bjorn also enjoys fishing. We have Laurent with us. Laurent is also an entrepreneur, a youth entrepreneur. She lists herself as a scientist and an educator as well, and passionate about teaching others. Laurent has been instrumental in starting an organization very early in her career and leading a startup. So we're excited to have Laurent with us as well. We have Les. Very excited to have Les with us. Very esteemed career at Mayo in many different capacities, and then now in entrepreneurship and consulting and building business. Jess from Darte Designs and MIT. Jess focuses on design thinking and strategies working with students at MIT. She is a first generation to college student as well. Mark Ritchie. Mark Ritchie was a former Secretary of State for Minnesota, involved in politics, the head of Global MN, and instrumental in bringing the World's Fair to Minnesota in 2027, and focused on that initiative as well as many other things. So thank you to all of my panelists for being here with us today. We're excited to learn from each one of you. I will ask a question, and when I ask your first question, if you could also give us a little bit about something I didn't share with the audience that you want to share about what you're focused on and some of your passions, I would love that as well. So we'll start with Bjorn. Bjorn, I would like to ask you first, being a youth and a dreamer, you're 13 years old. I hope I got that correct. Bjorn is 13. How have you been involved in business and entrepreneurship to date, and how are you getting involved in that?
Yeah, I'm Bjorn, and I'm the 6th of 6 kids, so yeah. And how have I been involved in entrepreneurship, like growing up? As a kid, I've always wanted to get whenever my parents would go to the store, I would want to get something like a little snack, and they said no. So I could only use that with my money. I could only get stuff with my money. So growing up, I wanted to make money. So I walked around my neighborhood with a flyer that I had made with my mom, because I just grinded on her so much because I wanted to go out there, do stuff for people so I can make money, so I can get stuff for myself, because I like snacks and other types of things, and I like to enjoy that stuff. So I walked around the neighborhood and I handed out these flyers, and within the first week, I got a call from a parent wanting their lawn to get groomed and their bushes to get their weeds pulled. So that was one of the big things in entrepreneurship as a kid. When I was growing up, I did lawn work and anything that elders needed for their house or anything they really needed help with.
Very cool. Now, I heard that you also want to be involved as a young investor and maybe investing in companies as well. Is that something you've been interested in?
Yep. So not too long ago, I got introduced into investing in the stock market. And what I've heard is that the longer you invest, the more it benefits you. So I've thought and brainstormed, and my goal is to start investing by the time I'm 14 years old. And so I talked to Lauren, and she's going to be helping me out figuring that out. And I've watched a lot of YouTube videos, and that's just one of the cool things that I'm excited to do. And I'm excited to be in front of my peers when it comes to that, because a lot of people don't invest until they're like in their 30s, and that's like a big opportunity that's very helpful in the future.
That's amazing, Bjorn. That's awesome. And hopefully with your stock market investments, you can become a venture capitalist and then invest in companies as well with some of those proceeds. So we'll look for you to start a new way of doing venture capital. So
That would be really cool. Yeah.
that's a great objective. You know, we've got some adults on this panel and a lot of folks watching here. This is your chance, Bjorn. No pressure, but what could adults like us do, or what can people do to include folks like you that started very early on your entrepreneurship journey of wanting to make your own money and build a business where you would have money for snacks and other things you wanted to purchase? What can we do to support you or include you?
Yeah, so I think personally one of the biggest things was me getting to know stuff, me learning stuff. And so I think a really huge thing is to ask your parents questions and have them help you answer those questions. If you wanted to be invested in the stock market like me and work on that and figure that out, I think one of the coolest things would be to introduce your children or other peers younger than you, other people younger than you, to let them know like all this information, because it's very, very cool when you can learn that stuff and when you teach people that stuff. So I think teaching is one of the biggest things, and teaching kids to learn the things like how to invest and stuff like that, because those kinds of things like that at a young age, it's kind of hard to figure out on your own. Like personally, I could never figure out how to invest in the stock market and stuff like that without YouTube and all these cool social medias and stuff like that, and without the help of my sister Lauren. So that's pretty cool.
So take time. It sounds like we all need to, as adults, take time and educate and listen and answer questions and be available, right? That would be helpful as well. Now, I know there's an organization that you actually pitched to. So I heard you're what's called a Gen Z correspondent for an organization. So are you actually doing some communications and reporting, trying to educate other youth on some of these topics, Bjorn?
Yeah, yep. So with that, I talked with a lot of people, a lot of social media influencers, social influencers, and I think that that was one of the coolest things ever, me getting to talk to all these very famous, cool people, helping out other young people just like me, other entrepreneurs like me.
Awesome. That's amazing. So sounds like, you know, get involved, and you've done a lot to take advantage of the things that are available to you, some of the resources and stuff. So Bjorn, we appreciate your perspective, and thank you for joining us on this panel with the folks. And I'm sure there will be some more questions from our studio audience later as well, but we thank you for sharing your insights here, and keep doing what you're doing. We can't wait to see what your stock portfolio looks like. I'm going to follow yours because I think you'll research it really well. So I'd love to know what you're invested in, Bjorn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll move on to our next panelist. So Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been working on? I know you stay constantly busy, so maybe some of the things you're focused on, and I did mention earlier, which some folks may not know what this is, or may have not seen one recently and that they remember, but the World's Fair, and bringing that to Minnesota in 2027, and that's supposed to be focused on health and wellness, which we all know is a big component of Minnesota and the Minnesota ecosystem. So maybe talk a little bit about that and how we can engage some of these folks like Bjorn and Lauren in that as well.
Well, when I was Minnesota Secretary of State, the job that people see in the public eye is being responsible for the elections, but the big job behind the scenes was registering and providing services for Minnesota's new and existing businesses. We would register about 64,000 new businesses a year. And so Minnesota is a land of 10,000 lakes and 64,000 new businesses a year. Think how many lakes that would be if that was happening every year. Yeah. But what I learned was these were all kinds of people in every walk of life, and this was the lifeblood not all of them wanted to be the next Google. Very few of them wanted to be a gazelle or these words. They wanted to find a way for their family, family farm, family restaurant, family manufacturing firm, family brewery, family campground. They wanted to have independence and security for themselves and their family or generation. So I understood that because I had been involved in starting a lot of family businesses and farms and others, and it was very clear to me. But I also was aware that in Minnesota, sometimes we have to think about things that are, outside of our arena. And then I was once asked by some folks in the state if I would help them do something that seemed kind of wild, which was to bring a World's Fair, like the one that was in New York in 1964 and St. Louis, so famous with movie and all of that, to Minnesota. And I thought for a minute, and I said, when I was 12, my parents packed me and my three brothers into the back of the car, and we drove out from out here on the prairie to New York and parked on the ocean and camped and went into the New York World's Fair. And I can remember viscerally how it just sort of, as a 12-year-old, took me and just lifted me up and showed me driverless cars and video phones and things that we are now kind of incorporating in our life. And it changed my trajectory, made me suddenly realize that there was a different kind of future and that future was there and I needed to get engaged. And it had things and people from the whole world. And so I stopped for a moment and I said, our young people, we need that same experience for the next generation. And the next generation, what could we do? And they got me involved, and I began working hard to try to bring a World Expo to Minnesota. You have to focus on a theme, and so health and wellness. We're not only Mayo and Medtronic, which are the world leaders, but we're also people that are world leaders in mental health, in addiction treatment, in keeping ourselves physically fit with parks and recreation and sports and all of those things. But I was really captured by the notion of how important this will be for our long term when I saw a little video made by Bill Gates, and he was saying in support of the idea of a World's Fair coming to Dubai, and that's coming right up, that when he was 12, his parents took him to the World's Fair in Seattle, and it blew his mind. And it made him aware of this new world unfolding of computers and all of this. And he attributes his life, his direction, his focus to that World's Fair. And I said, we have got to do this in Minnesota. But when I've been active in bringing this to life, one of the things I've been thinking about is how much it's about the conversations of sort of successful businesses from every corner of the planet. But what I realized that the lives that are being inspired are the lives of the young people who will come there. And when we do this in Minnesota, we have to be thinking about taking the Bjorns who are inspired and grow and get ideas and have them connect there. Yes, it's good to have the successful businesses connect with each other, the 3Ms of the world. Yes, but we need to make our hosting of a World's Fair and Expo in Minnesota a place that inspires young people, but then provides them with the network, the ecosystem, all of those tools that Bjorn was talking about and that earlier that Jess was talking about. So I've been inspired to help make sure this can come to Minnesota and that it comes in 2027 and that we know how to do it safely by then and that we are clearly focused on our theme, health and wellness, but on the inspiring of youth and giving them the capacity to take their ideas and to turn them into the future for all of us.
I love that. And on that topic, Mark, that brings to the question, there is a huge challenge between now and 2027 for all of us around our hospitals, our healthcare, our medicine, and how do we solve and step up to that challenge as we prepare as Minnesota to host, fingers crossed for all of us, the World's Fair in 2027. So I'd like to turn it over to Les and ask Les, if you had 2 words for us being front and center in some of this battle right now and seeing some of the issues facing healthcare today, if you could use 2 words to help describe for our folks listening some of these major issues healthcare faces today, what would you tell us, and what are those words look like to describe the challenge we're faced with?
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Les Wold. I'm a physician by training. I did my medical school training at the University of Chicago, and then with my wife went to the Mayo Clinic, where I spent 29 years in a variety of capacities, including being chair of the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology. I was the medical director for Mayo Clinic Ventures, the group responsible for commercialization of Mayo's intellectual property, and a member of the highest governing body of the organization, the Mayo Clinic Board of Trustees. Since retiring from Mayo, I've been primarily focused on entrepreneurial activities with small startups, both in this country and in Europe, and largely focused on healthcare and health and well-being. And this really is about the future, and the future is our younger generations. The two words I would use really to describe are the challenges are, one, integration, and two, trust. Why integration? Well, integration has many, many different facets that could apply to healthcare, but although the integrated group practice of medicine was founded by the Mayo brothers in Minnesota over 150 years ago, it's still not used widely in this country or globally. It's a better way to do practice. It more efficiently delivers the outcomes that patients want. But much of healthcare is still fragmented and siloed. Integration across those silos is critical to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of healthcare. The integration also needs to be across geographic locations. Imagine, if you will, the patient who goes to a hospital for an acute healthcare event, who then gets discharged. And that patient today, in a time of the coronavirus pandemic, may be discharged to home, may be discharged to a skilled nursing facility. And there's a gap in their care that needs to be filled, to coordinate, to integrate between that acute care event and their home care, self-care. It may be with home health, with a skilled nursing facility, and then back to their provider, to coordinate their care and integrate their care across the whole continuum. The data needs to be integrated in order to be able to do that. And this is more than just interoperability of IT information infrastructure. That coordination of data across the continuum of care can result in more efficient and more effective care. Let me give you a very specific and relatively simple example. A provider who's seeing a patient in an outpatient setting may wonder whether the patient's symptoms are related to thyroid disease. And therefore, commonly today yet, they will order a battery of, quote, thyroid function tests. TSH, T4, free T4, T3, perhaps others. But at least it's common to have a battery of at least 4 tests. For 20 years, Mayo Clinic and other specialty societies have promoted a best practice which includes a single test, the sensitive TSH, with then follow-on tests. You can see in this example, if you were to follow that practice pattern, that you could eliminate at least 3 and possibly more tests that a provider orders. Well, why do they order those then? Well, they order them because the system is disintegrating, and it's easier for the provider to order batch all of those tests together, get the results at one time, and then make a decision about a care pathway. If you had the ability, and it exists today, to integrate so that you could have that cascade of tests done, you can both avoid testing, avoid perhaps retesting of a patient, and more effectively coordinate the care. Perhaps one of the most important ways that the word integration can be used is reintegrating the patient and physician relationship. Today, there's a wealth of information and misinformation on the internet. And it's quite easy to, utilizing social media, identify an opinion that supports my personal biases. There's been a destruction of the use of data-driven decision-making. And we need to reintegrate data-driven decision-making into the care process. Things like shared decision-making, in which the provider shares data on risks and outcomes, potential outcomes with patients, to help them make a decision, have been shown to improve outcomes with respect to patients who have chronic conditions. But shared decision-making in studies has been shown to take 3 minutes longer per patient visit, and that's a barrier to its widespread adoption. Integration in terms of remote patient monitoring, particularly at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, is really critically important. Remote patient monitoring can help avoid the potential risks of an individual going to a provider. And it's also been shown in the case of cancer patients with, for example, patient-reported outcome measures remotely obtained to improve outcomes. Why aren't these things used more broadly? There are barriers to their adoption, and many of those barriers have to do with our reimbursement models. Fortunately, in Minnesota, companies like 3M and Medtronic are forward-thinking and trying to address those reimbursement models and looking at how value-based healthcare and value-based reimbursement models may be able to change these dynamics and both have a positive impact on the patient experience, decrease cost per care, and actually improve the provider experience as well. So those are just some of the reasons that I think the word integration is so important for us to consider as we move forward, and the critically important way in which we can reshape our healthcare ecosystem for young people in Minnesota and globally. Trust is the other word that I mentioned, and as you may be aware, the physician-patient relationship has eroded in recent years, and that relationship is based upon trust. And that comes back to what I mentioned about social media and the lack of trust in data. We need to reestablish trust in data, as Dr. Fauci recently mentioned in an interview regarding the coronavirus pandemic. The data is there. It should be obvious, but we have to be able to trust data and the scientific method. So those are the reasons that, at least at a high level, I would focus on integration and trust as critically important issues to reshaping our healthcare delivery system.
And one question to follow up on that, I think just in terms of the integration piece, you mentioned it both with integration and trust. You said we have the data, we just need to trust it. We have the mechanism, and Mayo's done this for years, it's not new, the capability to integrate. What do we need to do to spread that more broadly in the US and globally? Who needs to come together to agree to solve these challenges or to solve the barrier to integration that exists? Because it sounds like we have some ideas about it, but it's not being done. So who needs to collaborate to make this happen at the end of the day in your eyes as you see it?
I think one of the major barriers is our reimbursement model. Everybody is aware of and knows how to work within the system of sort of fee-for-service reimbursement, which we've used for decades. Recently, the move towards value-based healthcare and value-based reimbursement models really offers, I think, hope for the future. And that hope is really for the younger generations, frankly, because they're the ones that are going to be left holding the bag if we don't do something about this. But even things like the bundled payment plans for total hip and total knee arthroplasty have been slow to be rolled out by CMS because although providers may not like the current reimbursement system, they know. Insurance companies are very comfortable with the reimbursement system. They know how to assess risk and are doing very well, thank you very much, in terms of their financial. So I think one of the critical issues that we need to address is reimbursement, and I'm cautiously optimistic that the move to value-based healthcare, which Medtronic has been exploring and others, it is the hope for the future.
Thank you. No, that helps give us some direction on what we need. And it's a tough challenge to crack based on the folks that get incented in certain ways.
Yep.
Now let's turn to Lauren as one of our youth scientists, entrepreneurs, and educators. Lauren, from your perspective as a young entrepreneur in both tech and medicine, what can we do to be prepared for this ever-changing environment of business and medicine? As we just heard, there's some significant challenges. What can we all be doing? You see this perspective with a fresh set of eyes. Sometimes we see things too long and we stop seeing how to solve it. So I'd love your perspective on what we can do.
Thank you so much, Jen, and what an honor to be on the panel as a youth or a young voice and young entrepreneur. Just a bit of background about me. I'm 22 years old. I live in Minnesota, was raised in Minnesota. I'm a Minnesota girl. So this is especially exciting for me to be involved with. And I went to school for science, thought I would be a doctor, and went right into institutional problem solving in a laboratory setting doing cancer research, and realized pretty quickly that that wasn't for me as a first step, and I was more interested in social, political, and financial justice in the health setting. So I transformed a little bit into entrepreneurship, and some of my hobby projects became my full-time gig. And right now I am working on building a teleeducation infrastructure between Uganda and Minnesota with Mayo Clinic as a partner, actually, and a few other exciting partners in Minnesota and in the United States. So I have an interesting perspective and a bit of an international perspective, I think, on how we can personally and also on a structural level take on challenges like this. And I'll gear towards the personal because I don't have years and years of experience, but like you said, I have a fresh perspective. And I think it comes down to 3 personal steps that each of us can take. The first one is a question for yourself, asking yourself, are you a business leader or are you a leader? I think that often in medicine and in business and impact investing in general, many people are so focused on being a business leader versus just a leader that often the drive is very, very revenue driven. And while we are revenue driven as a society and in medicine, we are not going to be able to be patient driven. And so I think asking yourself, am I a business leader or am I a leader, is the first step. Then once you've decided that, I think the next question is, are you preparing yourself to continue to learn and grow? One of the things I think as a youth and as a youth who's aspiring towards medicine as a career is feeling like leadership is stagnant sometimes. So I think it's really important to know that leadership and that you yourself are willing to be a VUCA leader, someone who can and is prepared to withstand volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity, because the world we live in right now is a scary place. It's changing and evolving all the time. And I want to know that the people who are in charge and at the helm are willing to really be challenged and think differently. And then the third thing is a challenge to yourself, and something that I have to ask myself in my conversations with my 13-year-old brother who kicks my butt in impact investing conversations. Am I willing to go to the most progressive, innovative, youngest person in the room and be challenged? And I have to ask myself that as a 22-year-old. So whatever age you are in the audience, I hope you can take a moment and ask yourself, am I willing to go and learn with the most progressive, innovative, youngest person in the room, because I think that that can promote intergenerational change. I think that that can promote young people being able to be not on a side or politically motivated, but interested in the solution. And then I think that youth aren't afraid to ask questions. Sometimes when you're the youngest person in the room, having a little dose of naivety can be really great. It can really challenge people to think of a different perspective. And then finally, allowing yourself to be a little uncomfortable being challenged. Man, when I have been asked to represent as the youngest person in the room, I kind of felt a little entitled, like I was going to change the world with my middle finger up to the old people in the room. And that really quickly changed when it was flipped on me. And then 11-year-olds were making me feel like I wasn't valued. And so that really, really opened my own perspective of the necessity for intergenerational change, for me to listen to also the people who are in charge and have been doing it, and ask them, how can we work together to challenge each other to tackle these issues?
I love that. And I love the actionable advice you gave us on those 3 points of what we all can do. You know, in terms of, you and I talked about something you've personally had to pivot right now, your own business and your entrepreneurial goals, and deciding where you want to lead and where the biggest impact of your leadership is right now. I think you and I had a good conversation, which would be good for people to hear, around, at this time, you had a choice. Do you do what you need to do as an entrepreneur to further your entrepreneurship, or do you stick with a partner that's struggling in a third world country and be selfless for the bigger goal of impacting the world? So Lauren, if you could just talk a little bit about what you've done in that and your perspective on that. I think it's a good dose of, you know, how people can step up and be selfless instead of selfish at this time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen, for that question. I work with a team of about 7 developers, data scientists, all young people who are either in their process of attaining their degrees or are very self-taught. And because of an experience I had in Uganda with a partner called Kagezi Healthcare Foundation, a nonprofit in Uganda that serves patients in the Western region, we had been involved in building an app for them. And we were very excited to get towards a launch. We had things developed and on the way towards being very successful. Our models were in place, our C Corp was set up, and we found out that about 60 to 70% of the staff of our international partner had been laid off, and that our timeline would be pushed back probably 2 or 3 years. And while this was really devastating to hear, the first thing that we as a team decided was, well, what can we do to really actually support the people on the ground whose livelihood is being questioned right now? And we decided to dissolve our business, and all of us are doing the same amount of time, and some of us even more time, grant writing and supporting their business, because like I had said earlier, I think it's so important right now to be impact driven versus monetarily driven. And it wasn't necessarily an easy choice right away to choose to either pivot or not. But at the end of the day, we would not have had a business idea. We would not have been where we were without inspiration and without our amazing partners in Uganda. So we've pivoted our whole time, our business, to volunteer our time to help a whole community sustain wherever we can. And we have a lot of work to do. And that's just one country and one community and one business of a world that's really struggling right now.
And I think it's such a good point, Lauren, about, you know, we may all feel impacted in different ways right now, but you're talking about folks who are worried about, will I be able to feed my family? You know, will I be able to find food? You know, what will happen to my family right now at a very core level of basic human necessity and need, and trying to impact them. But, you know, people make a difference. And so, you know, these efforts and initiatives we're all doing make a difference. So I'd go back Mark and talk about, you know, we have a lot of opportunities here. Minnesota has an opportunity on a big scale to impact and host a World Expo around health and wellness and involving these perspectives of young entrepreneurs who want to be involved and make a difference. What opportunities do you see for young entrepreneurs to get involved and continue to do things like Lauren's doing of impacting on a world stage or a global stage, as well as part of the World Expo?
Well, there's three things that we're focusing on right this minute. The first is that while the world is digital, Zoom and all of that, we have opportunities that we never had before to bring inspiration into our own community and to export inspiration to others. So for example, there's an organization of Global Black Youth, which is an international organization of young entrepreneurs, and they did a series of webinars on COVID and other, you know, pandemic-related entrepreneurial companies being created by young entrepreneurs in all different parts of Africa and Latin America and North America. And so those kinds of inspirations can be brought from the rest of the world, and we can inspire others because we have these technologies. So that's one thing. The second thing is that in the shaping of World's Fairs in the future, we think of the COVID-19 pandemic as a warning. This is happening. This will happen again. These are things that we need to do in general. And so World's Fairs of the future are going to be different, and their shape and size and style will be driven by the young entrepreneurs in design thinking, which we talked about earlier, artificial intelligence, the new mechanisms that we will use to share ideas and information. It's a little bit ironic, but the theme of the Dubai Expo, which had to be canceled, not canceled, but moved a year out, so postponed, was connecting minds, creating the future. They picked this 10 years ago. But when we think about right now, we're being shown that we have to find ways to create the spark of innovation by the way we connect our ideas, our minds. When we can see each other, when we can go visit, things can happen. But from just taking science, for example, my father was a biochemist, biophysicist, electron microscopist. He shared information by hand typing articles again and again with carbon paper and putting in envelopes and mailing them off to Czechoslovakia or mailing them off to China. He had been a Marine in China's in the war. So we know that we're going to have to connect with each other and innovate in new ways. And young people will be the lead for that. And just the examples on the program today. The final thing is, and this, it's more aspiration. It's very easy for mega events to connect the well-connected, to connect the extroverts, to connect the people with the greatest sort of privilege and access. That will recreate some of the problems, the disparities, the discriminations, the, you know, ways that we aren't allowing the full of each of us to come forth, and we're not allowing society to have access to everybody's great ideas. So we're going to have to think very carefully about the ways that we do this, the organizing, the planning, the communications, so we don't recreate you know, what we have now, that's taking the rhetoric of the next normal or build back better. We need to figure out what does that mean in the context of a large scale event. And fortunately we have, you know, about 7 years and a lot of time to do that. But the really great thing is we have all these young people like you've had on the panel today and others who are ready, willing, able, genius in figuring out how to make a movement that can challenge gun violence in America, challenge climate change on a global level, challenge the discrimination. So we know young people are leading now on the social issues and the matters of life. So getting the opportunity to lead on matters of technological innovation and the sharing at a global level in the project of building the future that's where we'll have the talent, the innovation, the inspiration of young leaders. And we need to figure out how that goes right into the heart of the experience of 2027 and beyond. And I'm pretty excited about what that looks like, and I don't have a clue what it looks like yet.
So Jess, we are excited to have you with us today. Jess, if you wouldn't mind, you have a very interesting background. Would you just give the audience a little bit of that background so they know some of the things you've been focused on and working on lately during this time?
Absolutely, Jen. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Twin Cities. This is a beautiful event. I'm so happy to be a part of it. So my mission these days is to help organizations and their leaders leverage the power of design to increase their bottom line in a way that is creative, joyful, and financially efficient. For us at Darte, my company, design is the magic that happens in the cross-section of human behavior and useful engineering or useful technology. And I can tell you from experience, that's not an easy thing, because the hard part there is to find the true pain point for a person, for your user, hopefully your customer. Now, I've been translating concepts. I've been translating across users, across meaning all my life. I was born in Cuba and we escaped twice, first to Peru and then to Miami. And then I escaped 18 years later to MIT in a different refuge kind of way. And so I've always been translating these new worlds from, English to Spanish, now Portuguese to English and Spanish, technology, sustainability, earlier in my energy and sustainability career, looking at why systems are more sustainable than others and how you can include that in your human systems that you're designing, and of course in the products that you're designing. So I think this translation is very important as we try to empathize. And empathy is this muscle that we can build. It's a muscle that we can use to better understand our user. So I'll give you an example from the venture capital world. I know there's a lot of venture capitalists out in the audience today. So I was just in New York this weekend baptizing my godson. Thank you. And my friend was telling me about her new gig. She's working at a venture capital studio. So what's a venture capital studio and why are they doing that? So a venture capital studio is basically decoupling. One thing is the design work and one thing is the business creation work. So what they're doing is that they're having an in-house team of designers and business analysts and researchers, and all these people do all this work to identify two main things. First, is there a market for this? And two, what is the pain point? Can you identify the pain points? And that involves a lot of relationships with your user, your future customers. If they have that, they go to the next level. And then they're allowed to go into the solutioning phase. This is where you imagine, how can we solve these problems? And once they get some good prototypes there that are validated, then they pitch it to their venture capitalists that are investing in the work. And if the work goes through and they want this idea or business concept to go through, then the VC will invest in the concept. And the next step is to go find the MBA grads, the executors, the people that could implement, form a team and create a business to get this out. But the hard part is done. The validation is done because they went through a design thinking process. So I think it's really interesting to think about how to optimize our work. How are we going to be more resource efficient in the ways that we can create new value propositions?
I love it. That's so exciting to hear that. And a concept, right, that I think we'll start hearing more of. I've heard more of these venture studios now popping up as a concept, to your point, to get people more efficient and think about things differently. Now, something I want you to touch on for us is a concept that you introduced me to and our organization that I love is the idea around the gut brain, right? And in this world where we've got data increasing exponentially, data driven as companies and entrepreneurs is no longer their differentiator. Everyone's using data and it's an expectation that you're using data correctly. How do you see the future of leadership evolving and what can leaders start training in today to be better decision makers tomorrow, knowing that they've got this challenge and expectation of understanding exponential data?
Yeah, Jennifer, it's just not easy, right? So this part of my work comes inspired by a highly influential leader that I met when I was on sabbatical in Asia. And she actually works with a lot of MIT professors as well. And the way she put it was that when a decision comes to her, it's been through the hands of hundreds of analysts and millions of spreadsheets, right? If you look at the numbers, both are great options. So how do you choose? And she says that what she's had to do over the years, over the decades in this work, is to develop a new muscle, develop a gut brain. Because our bodies are processing, we're humans, we're like super cool, okay? We're making decisions and we're processing from many places. And it's not just our brain, but it's our gut brain. It's a place where you can think analytically for so many times that it becomes second nature to you. It becomes intuitive what the next best step is. Steve Vasalos is a designer way back from Steve Jobs' days, and he talks about taking a pie-shaped approach. So that's pi like, that's pi like the symbol pi, right? Like the Greek letter pi. And so in that approach, you're doing a dual-pronged approach. You're taking an analytical and an intuitive approach, or analytical and logical, or these two ways of seeing a problem. So you can, in fact, most of us have overtrained our analytical approach through the great schooling and experience we have. But how do you train the intuition? How do you train the sort of the analytical and the creative, right? So we have a lot of exercises at Zarte this summer. We've been working with a lot of MBAs to develop these exercising around setting an intention, or even just developing an intuition for your own inner wisdom, so that you can tap into your own processing center and leverage your second brain, right? The gut brain. And it's really cool stuff when you get to be able to understand yourself a lot better. And as a leader, it shows up.
No, I think that's a good thing. So if you haven't researched it, Jess brings up a great point. I know, Jess, you have some articles on gut brain. If people want more information on that, that they can check out on Darte's website as a reference and resource. And I've also seen a lot of TED Talks and some other research being done to your point on this topic. So a good thing to start looking into. Now, you've mentioned a lot about design thinking. I don't know if everyone out there understands what that is or the training that it entails, and adding things like chief design officers to teams and their C-suite. How have you been seeing organizations and companies start using these new titles around chief design officers to their C-suite and impacting their bottom line, to your point about achieving results in non-traditional spaces? We're actually, a lot of this panel around healthcare and medicine and hospitals of the future. How could places like that maybe leverage some of these new titles in their C-suites to reimagine?
Sure. Yeah, this is where the money is really, this is where the margins really are when you're solving a problem and you're creating new products, right? The bottom line is that the earlier that you can validate your product with real users, that's the earlier you will know that you're on the right track. And this is where this concept of fail often, fail early comes in design thinking. And it doesn't mean that you should only be failing. It means that you should be asking the really hard questions up front. And when you go validate a product, you're like, oh, hey, do you like this? Like, oh my God, this is beautiful, this is great. No, that's not a validation of a product. Validating a product requires you to get deep into a pain point of a person. And that takes a lot of magic. It's somewhere between art and engineering, and I call it design thinking. And so these tools and these techniques help you unearth the real needs that you can go after, so that your product stands on a pedestal of need, not just of praise. So that's really a market differentiator for a lot of products. So then what is a chief design officer, was your question. So you can imagine that this is the person that is an integrator for innovation processes across your organization. if back in the 80s we were adding tech gurus to our organizations because we were going to optimize computers and technology to help us have more returns, then now we're optimizing humans and we're helping them tap into their human power, decisions that only humans will ever be able to make, again, back to that intuition, and so that you can get better product, better margins, a better bottom line. McKinsey just put out a really nice report, it's a nice website too, on the business value of design. And I have this quote from their site, if you'll allow me. It says, "Design's impact on business can no longer be questioned. Companies that excel at design grow revenues and shareholder returns at nearly twice the rate of their industry peers. How do you up your game? Start by addressing your design leadership." So one of the things that we do, I mean, we have a whole curriculum on developing a design leadership and things like this. And one of our main stakes or anchors to the work goes back to my time at MIT, which is, MIT's model is mens et manus. It's a trivia moment for anybody that still studies Latin on their free time. Mens et manus means mind and hand, right? And so this is about approaching a problem in a hands-on way. And it's not just how you're doing it. It's just that when you're thinking about something, just to go for a walk already gives you new ideas and new perspectives. And that's a whole set of biological and psychological systems. Also, using your hands to inform your creation and your thinking also creates new neural pathways and neural networks to activate new ways of seeing the problem. So there's a lot of ways that you can, for example, design. I did this with a Silicon Valley startup, Rise On, for millennials looking for inner peace. And how abstract is that? Inner peace, what does that even look like? And so what does that product look like? Well, I guided them through some design thinking material processes to use some very low resolution, just humble materials to create and bring up the world, bring up a physical manifestation of the world of Rise On. And what did they want their users to walk through if they could just close their eyes and dream through it? And those artifacts became the center of the conversation, where we brought in their users and they were like, oh, so that's what that training was for, or that's where you were going, because they were now showing and not just telling. So it's the power of bringing that communication forward with the same ways we've always known, you know, back to our kindergarten days, and unleashing the kindergartner inside of us again.
I love it. That's awesome. So two really good things Jess gave us: gut brain and design thinking, and looking at design as a core element, and even maybe involving, if you don't already have a C-suite leader that's focused solely on that, putting that in your organization to drive what you need to do to the bottom line. So Jess, thanks for participating in this. We appreciated your insights here, and Darte Design, if they want to find you or some of those articles as well. But thanks, Jess. We are honored to have you as part of our panel.
Thank you, Jennifer. Always a pleasure. Go Minnesota.
Thank you to all of our panelists, Les, Mark, Jess, Lauren, and Bjorn, for sharing today. I know some of the folks will probably have some more questions for all of you as we roll into our question and answer from them. What I would say too, we didn't mention, but I'm passionate about, we're all in Minnesota. As Lauren said, I'm born and raised Minnesota as well, and we're all very passionate about our home here, that I hope that all of you will join me. I've asked Mark to join me in working towards legislation that will allow our youth entrepreneurs to officially own businesses in Minnesota. They've already got this legislation in a few states, not yet here in Minnesota, but I'm very passionate about making that happen for our youth here in our home state. Colorado has it, California has it. And we don't want to be behind in that. So hopefully all of you will join us in that opportunity to impact our youth and get their voices out. But you've heard from everyone. You've heard from Bjorn, Lauren, Les, Mark, Jess, all different ways we can get involved and make an impact. Any final statements from our panelists before we end our discussion here? Anything anyone wants to add? No, we're good. Perfect. Well, we will leave it to our esteemed audience to ask further questions to our group here. And we appreciate you, all of you, for tuning in. Hopefully you've been inspired to engage youth. Hopefully we've been inspired to make a change for the better in our future around our healthcare. And I hope this inspires all of you to get involved in some of the things we've mentioned here about reforms in our healthcare reimbursement processes, reforms around involving youth in our world and our healthcare, and the 2027 World's Fair in Minnesota. We all have a role we can play. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I appreciate your time.